Dear students, welcome to the talk. I hope you are going to fun watching and listening to it. The plan is very simple. I will just answer the question and I will provide some sort of additional information which will support my answer. If you believe that the answer is simply, oh yeah, linguists study languages, that's not really true, because what we really do, what linguists actually do in practice, is solve puzzles. In other words, we work along the same lines as the detectives that are famous around the world, either in English-speaking countries or in Poland, because we rely on evidence, we follow clues, we put them together into some sort of explanation, and we solve cases, very much like famous detectives, private eyes, and investigators. However, there's one crucial difference. Not every single linguist works on a dead body, which means on a dead language. Most of us work on languages which do have native speakers, which means languages which are very much alive. Some of us do follow the study of either languages or language varieties that do not have any native speakers left, which means dead languages. Like a friend of mine is fascinated by Old English verbs, in other words, verbs used in a variety of English which hasn't had native speakers for some 900 years. But most linguists prefer to work on living languages, which means languages with native speakers, which means our role model is not necessarily only a detective. We behave more like famous or less famous or just ordinary physicians and surgeons. Typically, we would call them just medical professionals, because we deal with living organisms, not human, but linguistic entities, but we study them, we try to solve their problems and find out how they operate. In other words, in a sense, we work very much like those people you can see in the picture. This is our role model along with the detectives, but how do we do that? How do we put that into practice? Let's try to see how that works in real life. For example, imagine you have an interest in visiting London. You want to go there because you want to watch Arsenal play a game live, or you have friends living there, maybe you have family out there, or you want to go to a music concert, whichever. You fly to London. Because I live in Wrocław, for me the flight is scheduled, as you can see it in this slide, and flying could be a source of linguistic inspiration like any other place where people use language. But let's use this example because we will study something that English proper names do. And as we fly, we see plenty of objects that have these proper names. So our plane takes off from our airport and we are up in the air, and then we think, wow, look at that. We leave Poland, we fly over Germany, but then it's the Netherlands that we fly over. In other words, we fly over a country with the definite article, the Netherlands. Then we fly over the North Sea, again, the definite article, the North Sea. And then we end up in the United Kingdom, again with the article, unfortunately in London without the article, but on the River Thames, again with the article. And you might say, wow, isn't that weird? Why is it like this? In other words, we have that sort of items that we noticed. We have plenty of time on the plane to think about that. So we start sort of ruminating on these things. We start digesting that and we say, isn't that puzzling? And that's very important. If you have ever had a thought that, well, some bit of language has puzzled you, you have the makings of a linguist. You have been created to be a linguist. You just have to unlock that potential and become one. Because, you know, linguistics is a very unusual area of life, because normally data for study is available only to a handful of people. Think of people who do physics or some complicated chemical experiments, or they deal with biology and stuff. I mean, you really need advanced equipment, and then few people actually get access to any data to study. In other words, the number of researchers is limited by definition. Linguistics is very different because language is spoken by millions of people, even billions around the world, which means the data that we study, which means language which is spoken or written, is available to millions of individuals. Not everybody becomes a linguist just because not everybody is puzzled by linguistic facts. Most people simply say, you know, who cares? That's the way it is. And they keep, using that, which is fine. Using language is good, but it's even better if we start studying it. In other words, we say, why is it like this? What's the rule behind it? How does it operate? What's the purpose of using grammar in that way? Why is it not any different but just like this? In other words, if there are any facts in language which you are puzzled by, you have the makings of a linguist. And it doesn't have to be what you can see in the screen right now. You can be puzzled by anything. Like you might watch a movie and say, isn't that weird? They say ambasadorowie, królowie I ministrowie, ale nie mówimy siatkarzowie, piłkarzowie, ani koszykarzowie. So we say, so I will study the unusual Polish plural of masculine nouns. Or you might notice any other strange thing, like you watch an American movie and somebody says over the phone, I'm afraid the car has been damaged. The guy is standing right in front of a car. He can see the car. What is he afraid of? You would say, isn't it weird that he speaks like this? Well, if this puzzles you, you will study the expression of politeness in English, a very rich area of study. You can join other people who have already devoted their time to this investigation. But we will follow a simpler case because we don't really have much time. So we will focus on these things that we realized are used either with articles or not. They are all proper names. We can see them here in blue and red, and some of them have the article, like the Netherlands or the North Sea or the United Kingdom or the Thames, and some of them don't, like Wrocław, Poland, Germany, or London. And we will try to solve that puzzle because, as I told you, linguists primarily are puzzle solvers. So we start thinking about these items and we say, oh no, how does it work? Why do some proper names take the articles and others do not? And we put some time and effort into it. We're sitting on the plane, so we have plenty of time to do something with anyway. And we consider our data from different angles. We try to attack the problem from different sort of perspectives. And at first, obviously, nothing happens because at first we focus our thoughts on our problem, and obviously no solution shows up because few problems are solved instantly. If you watch movies with crime stories in them, you know very well that the solution comes after an hour and a half or so. We have exactly 1 hour and a half to fly to London from Wrocław, so we have plenty of time. Let's do that. In other words, let's do more thinking. Let's look at it from some other angles. And let's say that roughly after an hour or so, suddenly you have something come to you, and this is an insight. This is something which you say, wow, this is an aha moment, as my favorite college teacher used to say to the students. This is an aha moment. I spotted something. You say, look out of the window, because I mean, sitting by the window is fundamental. You look out of the window and say, look, this is the mouth of the river Thames. And it's open-ended. It just flows into the North Sea. So it's not really a situation like we have with countries whose borders are fully closed, like the border of Poland, no article, Poland, or the borders of Germany, no article. That Thames, with the article, you would say, wow, it's not sort of lined with the banks on the left and on the right-hand side. Its mouth is wide open, as we can see in the picture. In other words, we would say the use of the article correlates with the natural feature of the thing that has that proper name, which has been given that proper name. In this case, the river. You would say, is it the only case? But this is our insight into how it works. You would say, let's look at the map. And that's what we can see on the right-hand side. Please look, there's the North Sea. And again, you would say, wow, it's the same story. It's not surrounded fully by continuous borders. It has plenty of holes. I mean, it empties into the Norwegian Sea to the north and to the Atlantic Ocean to the northwest and into the English Channel and the sort of southwestern direction and even into the Baltic Sea on the eastern section of the map, as we can see. So we would say, wow, that's why we say it. So that's the point. We would say there are some proper names which name objects, in this case, cities or countries, which are fully surrounded by borders. Countries like Poland or Germany have international borders with border checks, passport controls, and stuff like this. Cities like London or Wrocław have city limits. I mean, so far, no border checks, but anybody who lives there knows exactly where the border is. They know if they are inside the city or outside it. As you approach the city, you see the funny Polish or English road signs telling you you're entering the area of the city. So you would say there is a clear line which shows how the shape of the city looks like, where it ends, where it begins. In other words, we have continuous border, which is perceptible, which is easy to notice for the people who are around. And then we say, look, the Thames as a river has a mouth which empties into the ocean or into the North Sea, as in the case of our river. You would say, open-ended. It's not a fully continuous border that surrounds it. The North Sea, even more open. So we say, yeah, this is a real discovery. We have discovered something about the English language. We try to solve the case, and we can really see the light in the end of the tunnel. We say, wow, there is something that we can really discover in that language. So you formulate your preliminary conclusion. I'm saying preliminary because we have little data. It's just 7 examples. But our first solution is like this. Please look. We say, people use the definite article with proper names in English if the referent is the thing that we give the name to, like people, countries, cities, and so on. I will use the technical term because we form a preliminary conclusion. We have to sound like real scholars. So we say, we use the definite article with English proper names if the referent is not in possession of complete borders. If the borders surrounding the referent are empty, are full of holes, are incomplete. In other words, it's not a border which continuously surrounds the referent like the national border or city limits. And we say we don't need any article if none of these things happen. In other words, if we have a situation where the borders around the referent of a proper name are fully continuous. This is only a preliminary conclusion because please remember, data that linguists study is inherently messy. It's always full of surprises. And you say, what? This is a fantastic preliminary conclusion. That's my personal discovery. But then look at that. You can always get second thoughts and you say, well, this sort of stuff with the definite article that we have borders which are incomplete and then full of holes and the referent is not surrounded by perceptible border that is continuous. I mean, it works well with the Thames as a river. It works well with the North Sea as a sea. But what about the green things? Look, the Netherlands, the United Kingdom, they're countries. They have borders. They have border checks, passport controls. They have even different currencies. You would say, my explanation isn't perfect. There's a big hole in it. So maybe I should improve it. And linguists normally say, yes, let's improve it. Because if you think that, well, let's leave it at that. Who cares? I mean, I've already discovered something anyway. You wouldn't behave like a real linguist. Linguists do not give up. They never say die. They give up and try and again because they would say this explanation is only a preliminary one. That's only something that we have started working on, but it's not the finished product. In other words, if you let go, if you leave it at that, you'll behave like somebody who watches a movie and skips the final 10 minutes when the pieces of the puzzle all fall into place where the solution is presented and you learn who was the killer. I mean, that would be worthless to skip that thing, to skip that part of the movie. And that's why linguists never give up. They press on until the solution is better. So you start thinking about these two cases and you say, wow, maybe this is the way to do that. You might have another insight, like say that the plane is already taxiing on the runway of the airport where you arrived, and you're thinking it's like this. Look, the Netherlands has an S at the end. That's a plural word. So maybe that's the solution. Maybe we could say we need the definite article with proper names if the referent that the name is given to actually doesn't have fully complete borders that surround it, or option B, this proper name happens to be plural. And you say, oh, maybe that's an upgrade. Maybe that's a better version of my preliminary conclusion. Maybe this is a less preliminary conclusion, more of a final conclusion. And you could again leave it at that, saying, wow, I've even improved my explanation. But then you might say, well, let's go back to the data. Let's look one more time at what we have there. And, ooh, this is bad news, you might say. With the Netherlands, it could work, but look, the United Kingdom is singular. So you would say that saying that the plural actually is a feature that is linked with the use of the definite article with English proper names. You would say, no, that's not a good idea. We had a bright moment. We thought it was a spectacular discovery, but it turns out to be pretty poor, and we would say, no. If we have just one example that supports that, I mean, who cares for that? That's not a good idea. So you would say, well, technically speaking, there's the United States, also plural, also with the definite article, but then there's the Czech Republic, the definite article, no plural. So you would say plural, forget about it. We have to take the painful step of downgrading back again to our preliminary conclusion. In other words, we thought we have made some progress, but that's not the case. It was like following a false clue or following a wrong road, and when we pursued during a pursuit of a criminal, or taking a wrong turn when following a spy. In other words, we made a mistake. We have to step back and do some more thinking. Look at the clues again. In terms of a movie, you would say we're halfway through. It's like around 40 or 50 minutes into the movie where we have some sort of critical point where the investigation is about to unravel. And this is where we are. We have to reconsider the clues, and we do so. And we do some more thinking, we do some more examining the data, and then we say, maybe we could do it like this. Because please look, maybe what we should do is to look at the word the Netherlands again. So far, we were seduced by the plural ending that we can see there, S, Netherlands. We're interested in the end part of it, and we might conclude, let's look at the beginning. Maybe let's check what this nether thing is. Maybe that is going to inspire us to find something more creative. And you Google some kind of good dictionary like this one, where this entry is from. You read about the word nether, which happens to be an adjective, which is good news, by the way. And we say lying or believed to lie beneath the earth's surface. That's poor. That's not really helpful. But look at the bottom thing, lower. You say, wow, this is really something, because this is what the Netherlands are like. If you look at the area, that's partly lower than the sea level. That's below the sea level. And we even can check some sort of historical information, which is at the bottom, which tells us where the word is from. And well, that confirms our ideas, because it says, look at the end, comparative suffix. In other words, we compare in this way. Saying nether, we express some sort of comparison. You might say, well, not too many people use the word these days. That's true. But you might say the name, the Netherlands, is old enough to qualify for a use of an older word, because it was started as a name a long time ago. And then you say, wow, this is a true breakthrough, because we would say why people need the article with the Netherlands, because the name describes what the place is like. It tells us it's lying lower than the sea level in an important part of it, or very low anyway. So we might say, wow, this is really a breakthrough, because now we have a better idea. We have another sort of clue which tells us why the definite article is needed. We just have to verify that. So we say, how about the UK? Does it work with other example that we have already tried the previous explanation with? And we say, yeah, it does. Because please look, the United Kingdom, we learn the thing is a kingdom. The country is a kingdom, has a king, and it's created by a union. And if we look at the full name, the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, we will even see the parts that form the union, the island of Great Britain and then the bit of Ireland, which is known as Northern Ireland. So in other words, we would say, wow, this is something. We can now formulate a much better explanation. We can say it works like this. We need the definite article with the names of English proper with English proper names. If the referent has incomplete border, or the border with missing parts like the North Sea or the River Thames, or we have a name which happens to be descriptive of its referent, which describes what the place is like. The UK is a union of parts which form a kingdom. The Netherlands is low-lying ground, and we might say, wow, maybe this is a better explanation. It's still a preliminary conclusion because the data set that we have examined is highly limited. It's just 7 words, but we have already arrived in London. The plane has taxied to the gate. We have gone through all the passport checks. We're in the UK. Our friends have welcomed us in there. So you might say, yeah, the next day when they take us on a tour of London, we'll just look at the names of different places, different proper names in London, and we will have a look at how these names fit our explanation. And after breakfast, you set out the next day to visit the sites of London, and you say, wow, my explanation is working. Isn't that great? Look, you say the Natural History Museum with the definite article, because, well, if you walk inside, they show you all kinds of skeletons and rocks and minerals, because that's natural history. In other words, the name is descriptive. You learn what's inside. You say, oh, then that building, that's the British Broadcasting Corporation headquarters. And you might say, okay, that's a corporation that broadcasts things for the British people. Again, the name clearly tells us what the referent is like. Again, we learn about it. And we end up at the Victoria Memorial, and we say, oh, whose sculpture is there at the very top? Queen Victoria. So again, the memorial is devoted to Victoria, and this shows up in the use of the definite article. So we say, yes, our explanation that names which are descriptive of their reference take the definite article, it seems to be working. And is the other part of the explanation also good? Well, looks pretty much okay, because we went to Hyde Park and you say, look at Hyde Park. It's surrounded by a fence. There are gates. In other words, it's well-bordered territory. It's not a situation where you would need a passport. It's not like a national border, but still there is some kind of border because the fence surrounds the park completely all the way around. Wembley Stadium, like any other stadium, to get in, you have to go through so many checks. You need a ticket. You need to go through all these checks with your luggage and if you have any, and your clothes and stuff. Clearly, securely surrounded spot. Paddington Station, well, that's a train station. In the UK, to get on the platform, to get anywhere, you need to have a ticket and you need to go through a turnstile. And again, access is limited to ticket holders. You would say, this is all neatly bordered. Again, that's not a national border, but there is a very clear continuous border around the station. Buckingham Palace, that's the same story as Hyde Park. If you approach too close, the guards are going to stop you, and there's giant fence that surrounds the whole thing. So you would say, our explanation seems to be working. So let's see what happens after lunch. After lunch, your friends take you to see a couple of other sites in London, and you say, look at these tall buildings, the London skyscrapers. You would say, do you know which of these names go with the definite article? Because I already have a clue. I have some sort of hunch because my explanation seems to be working. So look at these 4. One is called the cheese grater, another one the gherkin, another one Canada Square, and the final one the walkie-talkie. And if you look at how these buildings look, and if you look at the article you use, you would say, no, that's a walk in the park. Anybody knows which is which, because obviously it works like this. Number 1 obviously is the gherkin, because as you look at it, you can see it's like a giant cucumber. Number 3 is the walkie-talkie, because it does look like this primitive communication device. And the final one, number 4, obviously is the cheese grater, because it does look like one. It would be hard to come up with any other name for it. While obviously in all 3 cases, we get the definite article because these buildings do show features which are captured in their names. Their names lead us to recognize them. Their names tell us what these things are like a cucumber, like a walkie-talkie, like a cheese grater. Well, obviously, number 2 is the boring example of no article used, because the building looks like any other building, nothing spectacular about it. We just call it one Canada Square because this is where it's located. So you would say, that's an obvious confirmation of the idea that no article is needed if the name is not in this sort of nice fashion, descriptive. And then the very final thing that you do in the afternoon, your friends take you to a Downing Street and you look at the building and you say, how unremarkable, just, you know, a bunch of windows, nothing special, just a number on the door, Downing Street 10, and obviously no article. But you say, how about American presidents? Why do they live in the White House? Why do they need the article in front of their residence? And you would say, oh, isn't that simple? Just look at the picture. The place really is white. In other words, the name does tell us what the place is like. In other words, we learn from the name how to find it, because it says, you know, go to Washington, D.C. and find a place which is just white and it's called a house. In other words, we learn that the use of the article follows from the principle that we have discovered. So we are ready to formulate the final rule. In other words, don't use any article if the name refers to an object, if it has a referent that is equipped with complete borders that surround it all the way around, like cities, like counties, or like, say, entire states or kingdoms, if their name is not descriptive. And we need the definite article if the referent has borders which are incomplete, which are full of holes, like, say, a river that empties into the sea, or the sea itself, which is not really surrounded by the shoreline as much as a lake does. So you would say lakes go to the right-hand side because the lake shore is fully complete, while seas stay on the left because their shores are not. And we say, yeah, and there's option B, if the proper name happens to be descriptive because it tells us what the place is like. Like we learn, for example, as we've seen before, that, well, the Natural History Museum truly houses natural history exhibits, or the British Broadcasting Corporation truly is British and broadcasts. In other words, the name tells us what the place is like. So we would say, yeah, this is our tentative explanation. We call it tentative because still it's not too many examples. We would need far more data to test it. That's the next step that linguists would follow, would say, yeah, we've solved the puzzle in a sort of preliminary way. We have an explanation which we believe is right. We have a hypothesis, if you want to use a more nice word, but what we really need is more verification. And that's what we are going to do, but it's not, I'm saying we, because it will involve you also, because this is my challenge. As you read things, as you play games, or as you watch movies, or do anything else where proper names show up, when you get to see them and they're English, in other words, for you, this is going to be new data that can be examined. Please check if they match these two rubrics that we've seen. In other words, the explanation that I have shown you can be developed. Does it really help in explaining, in other words, accounting for the usage that you have discovered, whether this is in books or in movies or in video games or wherever? If you find that, well, your data goes beyond that this explanation doesn't handle it well enough, feel free to add to the rule, improve it, tweak it, fine-tune it, make it better. But if this interests you, if this is something that you would like to do, it means you have the makings of a linguist. You should study languages. You should do modern languages, as they are called these days. And I hope this is going to be fun. So if you feel this is your area of life, this is your interest, this is something that draws you and attracts you, become an English department student. It's fun, I can tell you. Thank you very much.